Right. So we hear a lot about ethical storytelling in our field. So Matthew, what are some things that you think we should keep in mind when we're trying to get started in ethical storytelling?
Yeah, Jan, this is such a great question and such a great topic for our industry and our sector to really be exploring. And there are some key things I think to keep in mind as we get started. First and foremost, this is about honoring the dignity of the people and whose stories we are telling, right? Those whose lives have been affected and hopefully changed by the generosity that flows through our organizations. And ultimately, it is about them. It is their story, and we are stewards of that story. And I think keeping that in mind helps us to shift the narrative from this sort of guilt-driven narrative that has kind of run rampant through our organization to something that is more uplifting and empowering and showing the outcomes, what can happen, what is possible. I think that's a big piece of the mindset shift that's important for us to make. And it is about centering the person whose story it is and not centering the organization. And in many ways, often not centering the donor if we're telling a beneficiary story. If we're telling a donor story, then it is about centering them, right? But ultimately, whose story is it? And how do we tell it with grace and with dignity and not in an exploitative way, right? Because the thing about the guilt-driven narrative that persists in our organization is it works, right? In the short term, it works, but at what cost, right? It sort of plays on this scarcity mindset and ultimately is not about relationships and about the long term of the good that is happening through our organizations with our donors partnership. That's what we want to focus on. And I think that first of all, understanding that and having those conversations as a team to think about, okay, how are we going to do this in a dignified way? How are we, for example, in our visuals, going to show people at their best, not in a downtrodden state, right? That's where the exploitive pieces come in. So having those conversations as a team and thinking about our approach, recognizing the power dynamics that are at play between an organization, between the people in the organization and the beneficiaries that we serve, and thinking about that when we are choosing who's going to be the interviewer, who's going to go in and partner with a beneficiary to be able to tell a story, and thinking those things through so that we create this space where there is trust, and we create a space where we are simply here to serve the story and to help lift it, but not control it or own it, and center the organization in the process. Have those conversations, come up with some guidelines, particularly for creative teams, so that everyone is working from the same script when we go out to tell stories. I think that is how we shift our thinking around this. Again, there's lots to explore in ethical storytelling, but it starts at first by approaching it differently and thinking about our stories differently.
Okay. So correct me if I'm wrong, but as an example of guilt-driven, that would mean we're focusing more on what we're lacking.
Yes,
instead
absolutely.
of, say, celebrating what we are able to do.
Right. I think about organizations who do this really well and are showing, again, showing beneficiaries at their best, even if circumstances aren't the best, right? Circumstances aren't ideal. It doesn't mean that there's not a real need that we still need to address, It's not taking that out. It's just not preying upon that and showing people as victims, right? Because that really is re-victimizing them in storytelling versus allowing us to experience their journey sort of through their eyes and through how they've walked through life, and having allowing them to have dignity, and us really honoring that in how we approach it.